This is part 2 of how to make this mini tote, and here's where we left off. I'm going to box the corners, so I start by lining up my side panels and pinning them in place. Then from the bottom of the bag, I measure and draw a line at 1.5 inches. But from the side, I'll measure and mark at 2 inches. I'll cut this out and repeat this on the other side. Now I'll sew the sides of the bag together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. This next part is probably the trickiest part, but you're going to open the bag and match up the side seams. I'm going to open this seam here and match the bottom of the bag to the side of the bag. It should look like this, and I'm going to pin these together. I'll show this again, and you can see how the bottom of the bag lines up with the side of the bag here, and again, I'll pin this in place. This is what both sides should look like, and I'll sew this with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. The original Trader Joe's bag doesn't have a lining, so all that's left to do is to just fold the raw edge over twice and sew, but I want to add a lining to mine. Here is one of my lining pieces, and I've decided to sew an inner pocket as well. This time, to box the corners of my lining, I'm measuring and marking 2 inches from both the bottom and the side, and I'll cut this out for both sides. Now I'm placing my second lining piece right side spacing, and I'll sew the sides together, but for the bottom, I'm sewing from this point until this point, and then from this point to this point, leaving about a 5-inch gap in the center. Again, I'm using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and here is that opening left in the center. Boxing the lining is a little bit easier since you can just match up this side seam here with the bottom seam. I'll pin this in place and sew both sides, and here is the finished lining. Now I'm inserting the shell into the lining so that the pieces are right side spacing. I'm going to pin these together along the top, starting by matching up the side seams, and I'm being very careful to keep the straps tucked in during this process. I'm sewing this with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and this is what the bag should look like at this point. Now from the opening I left in the bottom of the lining, I'm going to turn the bag out to the right side. I'm being very careful not to accidentally rip any stitches. I tuck the lining into the bag, and I'll give it a good press along the top. Once it's all pressed, I can top stitch, and you can see here that I'm lining up my presser foot along the edge of the bag, and I'm just sewing along the top. Here is a close-up, and I've sewn over the straps as well. This next part is completely optional, but I'm turning the bag inside out, and I'm going to carefully pull out this box section of the lining and line that up with the corresponding boxed section of the shell. I'm going to sew these together in the space of the seam allowance. This step just helps keep the lining inside of the bag when it's being used. Now we can close up this opening here, and I decided to machine sew close to the edge. Next, we're going to reinforce the straps by sewing this shape. Again, this is optional, but this is a tension point on the bag, so we're just giving it a little bit more strength, and this is what it should look like on the outside and on the inside of the bag. Finally, the last step is to top stitch the straps along both sides, and you're all done. Let me know if you make one!